technical difficulties over. What'd you come up with? Rhode Island chickpea? Nothing. Okay, so today's the Solemnity of All Saints, where we're celebrating all of the saints who have gone before us. Many, many, many times, I know when I was your age, I had in my head, saints were old. Saints are old people. One of the great saints in my life, who is not a canonized saint, you're not going to find her statue in a church. Her name is Mary Rose Buckley. I'll tell you two quick stories. Mary Rose Buckley was like the most awesome old lady in my parish growing up. Mary Rose Buckley was the first person outside of my family to say to me, "Have you ever thought about being a priest?" She said that to me when I was in the 6th grade. I thought Mary Rose Buckley was crazy. I'm in 6th grade. How could you possibly talk to me about being a priest when there are so many girls around? When there's so much basketball to be played, when there's so much homework to be done. I can't think about being a priest. But anyway, Mary Rose Buckley, the first person outside of my family to talk to me about the priesthood. Hilarious story. Fast forward to when I was 22. I finished college, I was in grad school, and I had a girlfriend. Her name was Karen, and she was awesome. And Karen and I were pretty serious. I thought Karen and I might get married. I went to California and met her family. She came to Texas and met my family, which included going to Mass, and we met Mary Rose. So I'm with Mary Rose at Mass and my girlfriend Karen, and I introduced Karen to Mary Rose. And of course, Mary Rose is like the nicest old lady ever. So she's very kind. 6 months later, Karen and I, we break up. All right? It wasn't tragic. There were some tears shed. Everything's okay. She's married now. She has 4 kids. I'm a priest. Everything's great. But I go back to my parish the next summer, and I see Mary Rose at Mass. And Mary Rose says, "How's that girlfriend of yours?" And I said, "Mary Rose, we broke up." Mary Rose says, quote, "Oh good, I've been praying for that." Mary Rose Buckley, powerful, right? She'll never have a statue in a church. But I consider Mary Rose Buckley in my life to be one of the great saints. She died about a year ago at the age of 98. Right? A great saint in my life. So often, though, we think of saints only as being old people. We don't think of saints as middle-aged. We don't think of saints as teenagers. Well, I want to break that mold for you tonight with 9 young saints. And I want to start with this guy right here. I preached about him this morning. If you were at the 8:30 Mass, this is Blessed Carlo Acutis. Blessed Carlo was literally just beatified, just raised up to the blessed. All right, I'm going to just give you a little bit, but I encourage you to go home. You can Google all of them. There are videos about all of them. There's awesome stuff about all of them on the internet, all right? Look at this guy. How old is he? He died when he was 15. And we call him a saint. Blessed Carlo Acutis, as a very young man, had a great devotion to the Mass and to the Rosary. When he was young, he discovered something called Eucharistic Miracles. Go home and Google that. Really good stuff. Basically, these miracles where the Eucharist kind of comes to life. The Eucharist, it no longer looks like bread and wine, but it takes the form of flesh and blood. Pretty amazing. So he was so fascinated by this. And he also had some computer skills. My friends and I, my priest friends and I, we joke that he's going to be the patron saint of nerds. All right? He just loved computers. He just loved to play around on the computer. And he decided to make a website about Eucharistic miracles. Now, this was the early days of the internet, kind of the late 19s and the early 21st century, all right? So it wasn't like now, where everybody had a phone in their pocket, or everybody had all this access. But he just found the time to make this website about Eucharistic Miracles. Pretty cool stuff. And so if he just did that, we would say, man, what a great guy. What a really interesting guy. But in addition to that, he lived an incredible life of charity to his friends, to the poor, to his parish. When he was 13, he developed leukemia, which is basically a blood cancer. He got very, very sick, and he died. But what happened after his death is people realized, man, when Carlo was around, we were in the presence of greatness. We were in the presence of holiness. Here was a man who loved his faith, even at the age of 6, or 10, or 15. So he's someone just recently that the church has said, here, be like him. And they said that, the church says that not only to you who are his age, but to me and to the other adults that are here. To Pope Francis, be like this guy. A life of holiness. Probably the most interesting thing about Blessed Carlo, when he was buried in basically a sweatsuit and tennis shoes. So when they dug up his body, because he was going to be beatified, and they put him on display so everybody could come and pray. And there he is in his tracksuit and his tennis shoes. He died in 2006. This guy lived, for many of you, during your lifetime. There's number one. Number two, Saint Teresa of Lisieux. A little more famous, a little more well-known. Saint Teresa lived from 1873 to 1897. She died when she was 24 years old. Saint Teresa was from northwest France. Grew up in a little small town, grew up in a big family. Her parents are actually saints, Louis and Zélie Martin. Saint Teresa lived a life of holiness, even though she was young. She had a devotional life. She prayed. She spent time with Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. She loved to go to Mass. But the most distinguishing feature of the life of St. Teresa was what we call her little way. One of the things that St. Teresa made famous is that you can do small things with great love. Small things with great love. So famously, her autobiography is called The Story of a Soul. If you're into reading, if you want to read a beautiful life of a saint, St. Teresa, The Story of a Soul. And St. Teresa talks about doing chores around her house. Now we would think chores are like the most unholy thing on the planet. Emptying the dishwasher, taking out the garbage, mopping a floor. Nobody would get excited about that. She did. Because she saw it as a way to grow in holiness, to serve her family by taking out the garbage. She saw that as a way to sanctify her soul. I'm going to take out the garbage. I'm going to empty the dishwasher. I'm going to mop this floor. I'm going to do it with love. Pretty inspiring. St. Teresa of Lisieux. Number two. Number three, St. Jose Sanchez Del Rio. Died at the age of 15. Jose Sanchez Del Rio was from Mexico. And he lived at the time of great persecution for the church in Mexico. There was a war called the Cristeros. You can look it up. Pretty interesting history. Jose Sanchez Del Rio was greatly devoted to his faith. Loved the Eucharist, loved the Mass, loved Mary. He got to a place where he was helping out around the church, and he got arrested for it. It was illegal to go to Mass. It was illegal to enter a church. But even at the age of 14, 15, that did not stop him. In he went. He was arrested and was sentenced to death. It was very common in that era that people would die by a firing squad. They would be lined up along a wall. Soldiers would come with rifles, and they would be shot. As Jose Sanchez Del Rio was lined up along the wall, they asked him for any last words. Think about it. What might your last words be? You might tell your family you love them. You might say, I hope everybody has a great day. I don't know what that probably would not be a good thing to say. So Jose Sanchez Del Rio's last words were, "Viva Cristo Rey." Long live Christ the King. Shot. Right? Holiness. Holiness from a 15-year-old. Carlo Acutis, Saint Teresa, Jose Sanchez Del Rio. Our fourth, Saint Gemma Galgani, 1878 to 1903. Gemma Galgani was what we call a mystic, which means she had kind of a deeper prayer life than just about anybody. She spent a lot of time in prayer. She actually suffered a lot physically. But one of the things that she did, and you'll kind of see this theme as we go throughout, is she offered that suffering. She offered it for the good of the church. She went through some physical suffering, she went through some mental suffering, but she offered it up for the good of the church, for the good of her brothers and sisters. Now, maybe you're not going through what she went through, but every single person here, every one of us, we got things going on in our life that make life a little more difficult than maybe we want it to be. There's some suffering. Maybe you got some physical ailment. Maybe you got something mentally going on. Maybe some spiritual something. We have the opportunity, even as young people, to offer up that suffering for the good of the church. Gemma Galgani. Joan of Arc. Pretty famous. You probably have seen her, you've maybe read about her. Joan of Arc was a soldier. Joan of Arc stood up to the powers of her time that said, being a Catholic is not the way to go. She stood up to the powers of her time that said, following Jesus Christ is an empty road, it's a dead end. Joan of Arc didn't believe it. Joan of Arc continued to practice her faith despite persecution. Eventually was arrested and burned at the stake. Burned alive. Now you're saying to yourself, you get shot, you get burned alive, you get leukemia. I don't really want to be a saint. I put these saints in front of you because they are young and they were holy, and their faith can inspire us. Joan of Arc. Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. Pier Giorgio Frassati was from Torino, Italy, northern Italy. He came from a very wealthy family. His father was the Italian ambassador to Germany. Right? He was kind of in the upper echelon of society. But Pier Giorgio Frassati had a great devotion to the poor. There's story after story after story. His mother would buy him shoes for the start of the school year. He would come home after the first day of school with no shoes. And his mother would say, Pier Giorgio, where are your shoes? And he would say, I don't know. He would say, I lost them. And what he really did was he gave them to somebody who didn't have any shoes. He would come home in the dead of winter with no jacket. Pier Giorgio, where is your jacket? I just bought it for you. I don't know. I must have left it at school. He had given it to a homeless person. He lived such a life of service to the poor. And it was kind of like behind the scenes. His parents didn't even really know about him. So much so that when he died as a very young man, as you can see, they had his funeral at his local church. And the family was there, they went to the funeral. And when they came out, there were thousands and thousands of people outside the church. It was the poor of the city. They had come to say goodbye to this young man who had given them so much. And so his mother comes out of the church and starts walking up to people and says, "Why are you here?" And the woman would say, "My house burned to the ground and your son bought us new furniture." "Well, why are you here?" "Well, one day I was walking in the middle of the winter and I didn't have a jacket, and your son gave me his jacket." "Why are you here?" "Well, because I was homeless, and he snuck me into his room at his house," not advising this, "into his house to give the man a warm place to stay." Pier Giorgio Frassati, they called him the man of the 8 Beatitudes. We heard the Beatitudes today in Mass, Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek, blessed are they who mourn, blessed are the peacemakers, etc. He lived his life in such a way that people associate the Beatitudes with him. Now here's the other thing. He loved to climb mountains. Lots of pictures you'll see of Pier Giorgio Frassati. He's like hanging from a cliff. Right? So he had this adventurous spirit within him. Just because he was a holy man, that doesn't mean he couldn't have any fun. There's a picture of him with his friends, and he's laughing, and he has a cigar in his hand. Things we don't always associate with those who are saints. We think they just sort of stand around all day and pray. He had friends. He had deep friendships, but also an incredible prayer life and a life devoted to the poor. Pier Giorgio Frassati. Blessed Isidore Bacanja. Blessed Isidore is from the Congo. He was a convert to Catholicism. He grew up kind of with no faith, but he had discovered the beauty of Christ and his church. So he started to pray. He was received into the church, and then spent his very young life as a catechist teaching others. Same thing happened. The Congo, it was a bad thing to be a Christian. But he was so proud of his faith that he stood tall. He was eventually arrested. He was kind of chained to a wall. And he was there for so long, he got wounds on his arms and on his legs, such that they got infected, and that's eventually what killed him. Right? But here's a young man who stood for the faith, who said, "Nothing is more important in my life than my Catholic faith." Saint Isidore. Blessed Isidore. A couple more. Blessed Chiara Badano. Just take a look at her. She could go to your school. Right? She looks like some of you guys. At just 19, was known to her friends as Luce. Right? Deep friendships, a life of love and laughter and friendship, but also of deep devotion to the Eucharist, to the saints, to the Rosary. In her teenage years, came down with a type of bone cancer, which eventually killed her at a very young age. There's a whole big piece to her story that I think you'll really like if you go home and look up Blessed Chiara. All right, let's go back through just as a little review. We'll go 9 to 1. So we got Blessed Chiara. Go all the way. Go to the. Yeah. Okay. So here we go. Blessed Carlo, patron saint of computer geeks and nerds. All right? St. Teresa of Lisieux, patron saint of missionaries. Even though she never really traveled far from her house, she had such an evangelical spirit to her that we call her the patron saint of missionaries. St. Jose Sanchez Del Rio, Viva Cristo Rey. Such a profound faith in Christ, even at the point of his death. Gemma Galgani, a woman of deep prayer, even as a teenager, offering up her sufferings for the good of others. Joan of Arc, a warrior, a soldier. Right? She was not a wimp. She did not go down lightly. She was a fighter. She fought for the faith. When somebody insulted her because of her faith, she fought back. When they told her, your faith is not important, your faith is trash, she wouldn't stand for it. Joan of Arc. Pier Giorgio Frassati, the man of the 8 Beatitudes, a deep devotion to prayer and a deep devotion to the poor. Always looking out for those around him. How can I be of generous service to other people? Blessed Isidore, a convert to the faith, fighting, standing up for his faith in a place where they said your faith is not important. Nobody should believe in Jesus Christ. And Blessed Isidore, even as a young man, said, no. I love Jesus. And I would die for him and for his church. And that's exactly what he did. And then, Blessed Chiara. Again, a woman of friendships, a woman of joy, but also a woman of faith. All right, so we put these 9 together. And what do we see? We see that holiness is possible for the young. Saintliness is not something reserved for popes, bishops, priests, nuns, and old people. Now, are there popes who are saints? Yeah. My main man, John Paul II. One of my favorite saints. One of the reasons that I'm a priest today. An unbelievable saint. Are there popes who are bishops? Yeah. This Wednesday, November 4th, we celebrate St. Charles Borromeo. He was a great bishop and a saint. Were there saints who were priests? Yeah, I think of my main man, St. Damien of Molokai, my favorite saint. One of my great friends, even though he died in 1889. Were there saints who were nuns? Yeah, Mother Teresa, Catherine Drexel, Elizabeth Ann Seton. Are there saints who were really old? Yeah. Joachim and Anne, the grandparents of Jesus. Many others. But were there saints who were young? This was 9 of them. And I could go on with about 25 more. So I encourage you to dive into, maybe there's one of these that stuck with you. Maybe one of these where you said, I would like to know more about him. I would like to know more about her. I encourage you to dive in. Just a simple Google search. And what you'll find is unbelievable and beautiful lives like this one. Sound good? Is saintliness possible in the young? You better believe it. This is 9 examples, and I got a ton more. Okay, a couple quick announcements before we move to our small groups. 2 announcements. Ashley is running a Bible study that we're calling Summit, like the top of a mountain, Summit, all right? And that's going to begin this Wednesday, November 4th, from 6 to 7 p.m. in the Youth Center. You can RSVP to Ashley, and this week Brennan and Tony Smith are going to be leading this week. So again, that's Wednesday, starting Wednesday, November 4th from 6 to 7. And then the other announcement is that this Saturday, right here at this parish, we are going to host a Diocesan Catholic Youth Conference. So usually there's this big conference that happens in Tulsa. And there's 500, 800,000 people. COVID-wise, we got to spread it out. So we're doing one in Laurelsville, and they're doing one here. And we are flying in. The diocese is literally flying in speakers from around the country, including a guy named Chris Paget. I don't know if you've seen Chris Paget. He's hilarious. He's awesome. He's going to be at this parish on Saturday. So, it starts at 9, it ends at 4. Great speakers, live music, food, adoration, confession, and Mass. You can contact Ashley for more information. Sound good? Awesome. Okay, here are the small groups. 6th grade boys with Brennan. Go on, boys. 6th grade girls with Amy and Brandy. Make your move. 7th grade boys with Jackson. Come on up here towards the front. 7th grade girls with Corey and April.
Can we use the conference room? Can we use the conference room again?
8th grade boys with Rob. 8th grade girls with Karen and Marianne. 9th grade boys with Colin and Daryl. Make your move. 9th grade girls with Heather and with Megan. 10th grade boys with Jesse Martin. 10th grade girls with Noemi. 11th and 12th grade boys will be with Ed. 11th grade girls with Tony, and 12th grade girls with Cheryl. And everybody else online, zoom on in and get in your groups online. Love it.